Good job, baby. I'm a lawyer. I want to welcome you to the Grill Pit. The Grill Pit is a studio. IGSTS is a podcast. IGSTS, I Got Something to Say, is the podcast. And with this podcast, we try to look at the criminal justice system, try to give you a counter narrative to what's going on. There's not an individual who expresses any expertise. This is personal lived experience. It's not stats and facts. This is personally lived observation through observation, bringing you what's going on. So if you're joining me tonight and you're here because I posed a question and I asked, does locking people up with mental illness make you safer? Now, since you came, I want to ask the question and go a little bit further with it. I want to say, does it make the United States safer? Does locking an individual up with mental illness make you safer? Does it make the United States safer? It's something to think about. And I think it should be compartmentalized and individualized when it comes to you, right? And before you even get into we must understand the fact that crimes being committed by people who are mentally ill, for the most part, are petty crimes. For the most part, right? Petty crimes like vagrancy, loitering, petty crimes like theft, petty crimes like lewd behavior, petty crimes like just being nuisances, right? And those have factors to it. Homelessness, right? An individual might think the park is his home or her home, and they feel like urinating in a park is appropriate. They might be hungry, so they steal. They might be cold, so they break in to seek shelter, or in a place they shouldn't be trespassing, seeking shelter because they have no home. So in a world or economy, or the United States is based on capitalism, if you steal something, if you destroy property, you throw bricks through my window because you think Osama bin Laden is in the house, and you're trying to remove him or kill him, then that in turn, I'm calling the cops. The cops going to come, and the cops will take that individual to jail. We know that people who suffer mental illness serve about 60% more time in jail than the person who actually commits a crime, just because they're mentally ill. We know nowadays that majority of jails, I would say all jails and all prisons, have some component of psychology that serves the mentally ill. And they serve it not to address the person, but to address the person causing harm to the correctional officers or to the institution. So they're not there to help that individual become better. They're just there to sedate that individual, so they're so lethargic they can't do harm to themselves or to the guards, as long as they're taking their meds. So I said compartmentalize, because if we're talking specifically about vagrancy crimes, no, locking individuals up who have mental illness doesn't help you at all. In fact, it costs you a lot of money. Next, you have a person in crisis. Whole different scenario now. Person wielding a knife, you have a person with a gun. Now, at this particular point, you would say, yes. That person needs to be placed in prison to make me safer. But I'll tell you too that answer needs to be qualified also. Because we know that violence is not a part of mental illness, right? It's not because a person is mental ill they're going to become violent. So even when we say you, that person should be, because that person now has a severe mental illness, or he or she is in crisis. I go further and say you would hope that your city, county, state has a CRU, you understand that there's 988, or that person has 988, where they could call if they're thinking they're going to suffer a crisis. We would hope, what I'm saying at this particular point, that because there's no diversions, there's no diversionary programming in place, and if it is, it's minimum, and it's only in certain states and cities. It's kind of difficult the split is based on, first of all, the crime, the nature, the seriousness of the crisis that the person's in, and also when you look at it, whether or not the resources are available for that individual, so they receive help. So if it's not, of course, you need to call the police. But locking individuals up should never be an option. Ideally. Why? Because we know that unarmed individuals, 25% of them are in mental health crisis, and they end up killed, murdered. Those are diagnosed individuals. We don't know those undiagnosed individuals, and we want to talk further about that, about individuals who are undiagnosed, or people who go into the criminal justice system and that cause them to have mental illness, which we can say, if they say half of the individuals inside institutions suffer from mental illness, then we can say everyone inside the institution suffers from mental illness, just because putting a person in a cage, locking the door on a person, treating a person like an animal, keeping a person in a cage for 20 years, 5 years, 2 minutes, making them use the bathroom in front of you, making them strip in front of you, him, her, them, they, causes mental illness. They know it. They've always known it. I think it's that level that we should be at right now, understanding what they know, what the institutions, what they know, the institutions know, what these government officials know, why was it so necessary to remove mental institutions and then allow the upsurge of people with mental cases to be in jails and prisons. Now, the next question is the United States. Is the United States safer because they're incarcerating the mentally ill? Of course not. Of course not. It's all because, first of all, the profit involved, not for the United States. Of course, the government's not making profiting off of jails and prisons, specifically prisons, right? They're not they might send money out for prisons, but they're not jails, but they're not in the jail business. They're in the prison business. So no, they're not making money off of it, but drug companies are making money off of it, people taking drugs, these psychotropics. Okay. So yeah, that makes sense. Also, the benefit for the United States is that they never really knew what to do with people mentally ill. Some genius, this is speculative, decided, hey, just throw them in prison, because criminality and insanity are the same. And who really cares at the end of the day? Most of these people are homeless, and most of these communities, people in their community or family members in their community are fed up with them, for the most part. This is what they're saying. Not what SFMO is saying, but it just seems like this is what the facts bear. So what triggered me to come to this conversation? I get an email from VERA, VERA Institute, VERA. And I've been checking them out here and there. And I get a statement from them. And it says, locking up people with mental health conditions does not make anyone safer. And just triggered, like being back in a joint and seeing how the institution, the system, corrections dealt with individuals with mental illness, and how jails and prison, basically, I mean, most of the individuals, because they're ill-equipped, don't know what to do, end up turning that person into a circus act, just fucking with them, because they like doing that. I mean, they have nothing better to do, so they're just gonna fuck with that individual, make fun of them or her, him or her, whoever. So I decided what I was gonna do is look at it from a you in the United States, for opposed to just the general anyone. It's not anyone. It's just because it's people who have individuals with mental illness understand that the severity of the situation, and they want care and compassion for the individuals, and they pretty much don't want them in prison. They want them to receive the help that they need. It can be said the same about individuals who commit crimes. But the system has decided that the best place for these individuals should be prisons, jails, or whatever. All right. A couple of questions came up. Are people with mental illness criminals? Because in the minds of most Americans, United States citizens, all the terms blend: insanity, insane, criminality, competency, incompetent. Seems all to blend the same. So I'd ask the question: are people who commit crimes mentally ill? Are people with mental illness insane? Are people who commit crimes competent? Is mental illness and crime synonymous? And I will go further to say it's incompetence synonymous with criminality and insanity. Is it? Because it just all starts to make sense when you look at it, because they always talk about, a shooter, he was suffering mental illness, he shot all these people, but, and then you hear people, he's pleading insanity to a murder she committed. Makes sense. So you see, so the matches up, like they're making mental illness be the scapegoat or face for individuals who commit crimes. And I don't think there's any connection between the two, other than the person happened to be mentally ill when they committed a crime. And I'm gonna clarify that. Just sounds like hodgepodge, hojo mojogo, but it's, so I just said that there's no connection between criminality and mental illness, other than the individual who had just committed a crime is mentally ill. That's the only connection. It's not the fact that they were mentally ill that they committed a crime. It was the fact that they happened to be mentally ill and they committed a crime. Mental illness doesn't make individuals commit crimes. We're going to break that down, because remember, I'm a lawyer, prison lawyer, not a psychiatrist. I don't have a JD. I have a degree, but it's not jurisprudence nor psychiatry, psychology, none of that. So, but just follow me. I just did a lot of research on this, and like I said, my walk into this is through experience, and I think that I have a higher degree of knowledge than an individual who looks at stats and facts, right? Sat in there with these individuals, experienced these individuals, and seen how the system treated these individuals without any gloss or floss. So my last question, it made me think, is mental illness the reason for mass incarceration? And this is not me searching or grabbing for straws. It's saying that these institutions, corrections, and these insane asylums are cousins, not distant cousins. I mean, these are first cousins, right? Started around the same time, dealing with people that society doesn't want and treating them in the same manner. Sterilization was okay. Eugenics made that okay. You know what I'm saying? So these people were people that you did not like. You sent them to insane asylums, right? People you did not want in your household for whatever reason. If you can't pin a crime on them and send them to the prison, you send them to the mental ward. Make up something. Yeah, make up whatever you want to make. This is the United States. So, is this synonymous with mass incarceration? It's a fair question. And what I like to do, for those who want to stick and stay, for those who want to TikTok dance, check their feeds and scroll, whatever you want to do. I said, dance, TikTok, I don't know, fuck y'all do. A post to listen to this breakdown. Cool, I thank you for the view. Thank you for the view. Thank you for the support. Thank you for just sticking and staying with us. It's been a long ride. We hope to go further with this. But what I wanted to do is start with just trying to break down competency and insanity. Well, incompetency and insanity, right? Because a person those definitions are important, right? Because in order for you to understand insanity or mental illness, we must understand what the court sees as they look at these individuals, and how they end up in prison or in jail or whatever. If we know they are mentally ill, apparently the court doesn't, because they say you're perfectly fine, go to jail or prison. I also like to look at the history, because history is important. Because like I said, these are related institutions that saw the same start, and it seemed like they almost merged if you follow the history. Then you want to look at a little bit further into the drug business. How much did drugs play a part? Psychotropics, drugs. And I would just say drugs to street drugs. How much did all these things play a part into mental illness? One drug, of course, psychotropics being the save-all, and then the drugs on the street being self-medication. Alcohol has always been self-medication. So how much did that play a part, or how much does it play a part in violent mental illness, people wanting to self-medicate themselves? I guess lastly, we'll try to debunk the myth between mental illness and violence. That's what we're going to try to shoot. That's what we're going to shoot for. Debunking the myth. I guess at the end, look at alternatives, talk about 988 and CRU. Some might say too little too late. I don't know. It's all good. This SAF Morning Prison Lawyer. SAF Morning Prison Lawyer. SAF Morning Prison Lawyer. You're in. Stick and stay. I'll be right back.
You're in the grill pit, bitch.
Good job, baby.
One time, like this. For those who hop and make your one nigga straight loony after taking one.
Accepted quite a few Africans as deities.
They are in prison.
Prisons have become the new asylums, the new state mental hospital facilities.
Tonight, Frontline takes an unprecedented journey inside one of America's largest prison systems.
Once they get out of control, you do have to use force on them.
And investigates the stark reality of locking thousands of the mentally ill behind bars.
The attitude has been, you lock people away, then they're no longer a problem.
Prison is simply not the place to provide mental health care.
Why have America's prisons become the new asylums?
This is Presidents and Fellows of Harvard College, special issue, introduction, Jeffrey W. Watson, PhD. And I'm just going to read a section just to start us off. give us a fresh look at the conversation. The idea that an objective malady of the mind could make a person act violently is at least as old as the biblical story of the evil spirit that overtook the Old Testament King Saul, filling him with an unwanted fear and causing him to suddenly to harp-playing prodigy and future son-in-law David. We have only to substitute mental illness for evil spirits in this ancient tale, and it finds resonance with the widely accepted modern narrative of psychosis-driven violence. We read into the story that it was Saul's delusional perception of threat from David that engaged the king and animated his irrational attempt to kill his young friend, and given the simple formulation of the violence problem, the obvious solution is to remove it one causal agent, the evil spirit, by means of some effective intervention. Antipsychotic pharmacotherapy as a remedy for violence is thus the modern analogy to exorcism.
The Care Act does in fact create a lot of opportunities to advance criminal justice reforms. Most specifically, the ACA represents one of the biggest expansions of mental health and substance use treatments in our nation's history. There's a lot of talk around the nation about the importance of Medicaid expansions, stronger requirements to provide a wider range of benefits for behavioral health services, channel that stream of funding and those extra benefits to build capacity in the community to prevent people from relying on criminal justice systems to provide behavioral health services that they do.
All right, I told you we were going to start with breaking down the difference between an insanity plea and incompetency. And I use them as pleas because we're talking legally about what insanity looks to the courts, because we want to go inside prisons. This is from the Law Dictionary, and it says the term insanity and incompetency are heard so often in media coverage of high-profile criminal cases that it can be easy to confuse the two. A lot of people may wonder how it is possible for someone to enter an insanity plea when they have already been deemed fit to stand trial, competent. While insanity and competency are related in some ways in the justice system, there are two separate and different legal concepts. Nonetheless, they are both very important for understanding how the justice system works, and they may have an immense impact on both how cases are tried, right? So the conversation is, how can a person be competent to stand trial, but then put into defense for insanity and receive that defense when they're competent? We understand first that the competency by the Constitution is necessary. If you're not competent, then you cannot be held accountable and you can't be charged with a crime. So first you must understand those charges that's being waged against you. Understanding the charges, and then breaking it down a little bit further and getting a little more technical for the individuals who are super technical. For anyone to have a fair trial, he or she must be able to understand the charges against him or her. So that's why they ask you, once they arraign you, do you understand these charges? You should say no, because you don't. But most people say yes, because they've been told to. Then we enter into a plea, and the plea you usually into is not guilty, to establish the conflict in order for you to go to trial and defend yourself. Here comes our defense. The defendant must be able to understand what they are being charged with and must be able to discuss the charges with his or her attorney in a reasonably rational way in order to consider competent to stand trial. Now, this is important because now, I mean, for you guys who are staying with me, we're going to go further and we're going to get personal with these cases. One case in particular that involves a rape by an individual, and it's obvious that he's mentally ill to the point that he suffers all schizophrenia affective, the bipolar, all these elements to him. Yet still he was accused of a rape, and it makes no sense. But as we move further, you're going to understand that my position is a lot of these crimes that have been solved with individuals who are mentally ill, and these police officers utilize their mental illness against them, as sad as it is. And nobody's at as bad as the insane asylum, these mental hospitals were. The solution has become prison, and these individuals have become victims. So let's just go. So we're trying to understand the difference between we understand now. In order for you to be charged with a crime, you must be competent. And basically your lawyer is going to tell you what to say. I guess that's competency. Because they're going to sell you to the state. In other words, the competency of a defendant is determined before the trial begins. Being declared competent to stand trial simply means the defendant understands the charges against him or her. It's not a statement about whether or not a defendant was sane or insane at the time. This is important because that's just the difference. So there's no connection between competency and insanity when the court looks at it, because if insanity is judged at the time of the act was committed, then competency is how you sit in front of the court now. You could be Looney Tunes right in front of the judge at this particular time, and they can say you're not competent, so you couldn't commit the crime. It doesn't, so it's not the same thing. You're doing whatever the hell you want to do, talking to yourself, whatever the fuck. So you could be like that. That'd be a competency deal. So you would have to have maybe a hearing in regards to that. But the insanity plea comes later on down the line. And it's your state of mind when the crime was committed. When determining whether or not a defendant is insane, the court is not considering the defendant's state of mind during the trial, but rather during the criminal act. So a person can be found to have been legally insane when a crime was committed, but nonetheless competent to sit in trial. In fact, a person can only be successfully found legally insane so long as they are competent to stand trial, since being incompetent to stand trial means no trial can take place because it's unconstitutional. So that's just the difference between the two. Let's go further and let's just break down this history of let's just get us up to date to understand how we went from having mental institutions to institutionalized mental institutions to placing people in prison. And all we're trying to do right now is just brace. So we understand that we right now we understand that competency and insanity or being sane aren't the same in the court's mind. Now we might speak about it the same, wrongly, but when it comes to courts, we understand that they're different. We have another term, mental illness, and exactly what mental illness is, and how does the court recognize mental illness? Is it just the umbrella that sits where insanity sits, or is it being diagnosed prior of having schizophrenia affective, bipolarism, hallucinations, stuff like that. This mental illness prior to coming to court, diagnosed, but the court still, at this particular time, is seeing whether or not you're competent or whether or not you were sane during the time. So were you in crisis during the time when this thing happened? So let's just look at this. Let's look at this, the history, and break that down a little bit.
And at the same time, we have to think that not everyone who goes to prison just goes away. They come back. 99% of them will return to communities. And too often, what happens when they go in correctional environments, while some will receive access to health care, we do a very poor job of handing them back off to the community. They permeate public health implications to families. But we have to think of this issue on a much broader scale. And in public health, we often talk about the social determinants of health. And what that means, we have to unpack what incarceration has done, not just in people's access to health care, but to employment, to housing, to social benefits, to economic mobility, education. All of those things come together to really define what makes a healthy community. And we know there's a ton of research to show us that mass incarceration has made it much harder for people to get jobs, much harder for people to sustain housing. And all of those things combined, we know, can have negative impacts on people's morbidity and mortality. The Affordable Care Act.
SF, know your prison lawyer. 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 Thank you for sticking the stand. Prison lawyer, and I want to welcome you back. You're in the grill pit. You're in the grill pit. I want to welcome you back. Thank you for coming back. Well, we wanted to look at the history of deinstitutionalization. We know in 1833, we see in Massachusetts, the first mental hospital, fully supported by state funds. That's the criteria. It might have been one a little bit older, but this one's state run. This is not a community run. I'm sure they had other houses for individuals, but this is state run. So this is specific. And we're going to jump to 1946, where we find Life writing an article about and depicting the horrors in the hospitals, right? They go through it. And then in 1954, we see Thorazine is approved by the FDA. It's the first antipsychotic drug. It was being used prior to that in other countries, but it finally got to the United States. They were claiming it was the do-all miracle drug. We see in 1955 the number of patients inside public mental hospitals nationwide was over 500,000. California specifically, because California we're going to use California because it's the best place where we could test our theories and we can see the institutionalization of these hospitals, and we can follow the trend a lot better through California, right? So we see in the number of patients in California state peaks at 37,000. This is 1959. 1963, President John F. Kennedy signs the Community Mental Health Act. This pushes the responsibility of mental health from the state toward the federal government. Now, this is significantly important because this push from state to feds was good in a sense, but a month later, President Kennedy assassinated, and his dream of this happening never matures. The reason why he was so inspired, because remember, he has a sister who has a lobotomy, and that's important. So he's connected with the story, and he wanted something good to come out of this, right? So we see in 1965 that Congress established Medicare and Medicare, and mentally disabled people living in community are eligible for the benefits, but those in psychiatric hospitals are excluded. Very important. Very important, because it pressures these hospitals to shut down and push people out into the streets, supposedly push people out into the streets. And it's all solely based on people being able to medicate themselves with drugs. So we're just going through, we're just going through the history. But that makes you ask a question: how much was the drug company part of this? We see Ronald Reagan. He shows up a couple of times in this, and you wonder, if I'm not sure, but if his campaign was being funded by these drug companies. We don't know. It'd be great to do some research into it, whether his governorship or his presidential, because he comes back later on and makes some crucial decisions when it comes to this California. That's why I say California is a great place to look at, because we see the governor Ronald Reagan. He signs it into law. It was the Lanterman-Pinterest Short Act, and it ends the practice of institutionalizing patients against their will or for the indefinite amount of time. Prior to that, we did see state hospitals falling in patients, but that could have been easily attributed to the fact that hospitals weren't receiving the money necessary because they weren't able to get Medicare and Medicaid money, and the fact that Kennedy had, before he died, passed this Community Mental Health Act that basically, so you've seen all this stuff happening in succession. So the fact that Ronald Reagan came into office and he had very few people, or his population of people in mental institutions were small. He decided to empower the patient, or those people who were suffering mental illness, by ending the practice of institutionalization of patients against their will and for indefinite amount of time. The law is regarded as the patient's Bill of Rights. So you see that in 1969, he had to reverse his budget, because what's missing in this is when he basically shuts down all these state hospitals, the next year crime increases. All the people who are mentally ill start entering the criminal justice system. It doubles that year. The year later, it doubles. His jails. I'm not sure how prisons, but we know jails they're doubling, and their populations doubles in size. So what is that? Is that our first connection? That's why I say California is great, because we see obviously what's happening. But nobody's making the connection at this particular juncture between mental illness and criminality or incarceration. So it hasn't been made as of yet. So we keep going. So we see Jimmy Carter come in and sign the mental health systems. This improves the Kennedy dream. In 1981, we see Reagan come back and repeals Carter's legislation with the Omnibus Budget Reconciliatory or Reconciliation Act. And this is funny because we've seen him in his state do the direct opposite. This pushes the responsibility of mental ill patients back to the states. The legislation creates a block grant for states, but federal spending on mental illness decline. This is important because right in his time, we see the crack epidemic. and it's 1981. We see crack cocaine. It's getting ready to come out. So as we go further into this conversation, we're going to also see that the reasons why individuals have serious mental illness is due to their environment, is due to violence, is due to substance abuse. So these are the triggers. So again, when I first said this is mental illness, a person who commits a crime happens to be mentally ill because there's triggers to a person going psychotic. And a lot of those triggers are found in the communities where people live every single day. We're going through this timeline. We're not here, you know, so if you look at the timeline to what's going on, we find increase in homelessness. When all this stuff happens, so when they push people out of these institutions, we find that things start to increase. So right off from the outset, it's easy to say the deinstitutionalization of these mental hospitals is a reason why. And we can almost make the conversation that somehow mass incarceration is being funded by this. But I just told you, I told you one thing that we saw when Reagan closed his hospitals, mental hospitals. We seen a double in his jail population. I'm not saying prison. I'm just going to say jail for right now, because prison is going to take a while for you to hit prison. So jails, we know jails doubled in size. We can make that and say that with confidence. But then immediately in your mind, you're thinking like, hey, it has to be a connection between the deinstitutionalization of mental hospitals, and increase in prison population, and the mentally ill is the numbers that made the increase happen. You know, you could say some sets of drugs, criminalization, made it happen. You would say, yeah, well, there's a lot of people that went to jail because of the war on drugs. And there was a lot of people who went to jail because of the institutionalization of the mental hospitals. And that should be the end of this conversation. It should be. But I want you to hang on, stick and say, this SAF Moyer prison lawyer, that does not cause mass incarceration. So I want to clarify. So we see in 81 that Reagan, we have him as president. We know at 81 the crack epidemic is starting to come up, starting to go mad, right? At that particular time, he pushes mental illness back to the states, the funding, states to handle your business. We also know that people who suffer serious mental illness has certain factors that trigger them. Substance abuse being one. So also the environment, being in a crime-ridden environment triggers it. So we know these things cause it. So then we can say, we know that they have reduced all monies or no monies to state hospitals. Well, there's no state hospitals, but there's supposed to be community money, and we have drugs. People are supposed to be self-medicating themselves. So they're fine. But we know we see an upsurge in homelessness. We see a lot more cases of mental illness. We see a lot of things going on. So it's that the Thursing situation or the psychotropic drugs aren't working as well as they thought they were going to work. And on top of that, Thursing had side effects. But I was going to say, when I made a connection, and the connection immediately made you assume that it could be easily fixed by reinstating these institutions and funding these institutions. But that's not, from the onset, I thought that was the case. Yeah, let's make the connection between mental institutions and that would show us mass incarceration, but it's not. Sick and stay. Be right back. This is SF Mo, your prison lawyer. You're in a grill pit. IGSTS for you lames.
Junior year in college, she had a series of relapses and rehospitalizations, and that finally ended in her encounter with the criminal justice system, who were not contesting what happened. We simply wanted her to get help.
My brother has schizophrenia, and we were really afraid that he was going to hurt somebody, and we called the police. And he was lucky. He didn't end up in jail. He ended up getting psychiatric help, which is exactly what he needed. But all too often, such individuals don't end up in care, but they end up in jail.
Thank you for sticking the stand. This conversation means a lot because I think that it's time for someone to stop trying to get in front of the conversation and make it about them and make it about those individuals who are suffering in prison. Serious, because as much as people try to take hold of the conversation, it's bigger than anybody, and individuals need real help. They don't need people talking about it. They need to be putting money behind it and working on resolving this problem. Because I left you. Welcome back. Welcome back. Those who stepped away for a minute. I know I did step away for a minute. Welcome back. And I left the conversation with it being the connection between deinstitutionalization and mass incarceration. It could be assumed, because we know at the time when Reagan, as governor, caused himself shutting down the mental hospitals, we saw it in 1971. He does it in the 60s, the late 60s. But in 71, we look at the prison population, it was 20,000 people in California prisons. It did double the jails. So now we went from jails. We knew jails doubled in that following year. So prisons, it takes a little bit longer for prisons to start seeing an increase because people have to go through charges, but jails are going to see it immediately, right? People getting locked up. So in 1971, we know there's 20,000 people in California prisons. In 2010, there's 162,000 people in prison, and 45% of those people are mentally ill. And then I can make the argument that all of them are in prison and mentally ill, because how do you do time in prison and not suffer mental illness? It's impossible. You have to be, in order for you not to have it, you have to already have it, because there's no way to be in prison and not suffer mental illness. It's not what I'm arguing today. I'm not trying to argue that. I'm just trying to give you why it wasn't de-institutionalization that caused mass incarceration, although it looks like it from the onset. There's many people who made that argument. So we know that in 1957, Short-Dolly Act begins defunding state mental institutions. We're not going back into the history, the chronological history. We're just trying to refresh and stay a little bit with California, because I told you California is the most starkest example, and it's been documented well. The transition from mental hospitals to incarceration, and in the middle we see the deinstitutionalization. We see that president, that governor who becomes president, and we see the decisions he's making. that affects the mentally ill, which is Ronald Reagan, right? So in 1968, we see Ronald Reagan pass the Lennerman-Prentice Short Act that imposes restrictions on involuntary hospitalization of the mentally ill. We see 1972, 1973, Governor Reagan vetoes funding for community mental health facilities, so on and on with that. So there's the connection between mass incarceration and the deinstitutionalization of mental hospitals from the onset looks like it's connected. The one part is missing. So in 1967, President was Nixon. And his Tough on Crime Act is what spawned mass incarceration. And with that spawning of mass incarceration, it spawned criminalization of everything. With that criminalization of everything, now you have people who are homeless, because that's part of being mentally ill, because you have no place to go. That part becomes criminalized. So it was the fact that these institutions was closed down. They had no place to go, but they're not violent people. But everything you do now is a crime. So now they become criminals. So it wasn't so much, it was almost a combination of different things that happened. And the umbrella of that is the criminalization of everything that sparks mass incarceration. But you also had that president in 1981, which was Ronald Reagan, and in his state comes crack cocaine, which is a self-medicated drug that people who had mental illness took. So in the combination, you have this governor who was president, who was part of this increase, part of this mass incarceration, part of this deinstitutionalization, and you ask yourself, how did he receive his money? A lot of people say he's one of the best presidents they ever had, and you wonder why they say that. Now I'm giving you the facts. Why? So we have that. So now, since we went through breaking down competency, incompetent, sanity, insanity, criminality. Then we went through the history and got you past that point. Now we're up to the point where we talk about the drug industry. And the problem I watched a lot of videos that dealt with the drug industry and a lot about institutions, about how people did well when they had structure, and the structure was them religiously taking their psychotropic, and the psychotropic in turn caused them not to harm themselves or harm others. Then I watched individuals who the opposite, they were so you had individuals who were taking the psychotropic, structure helped them, and that in turn was the reasons why. So they had this whole documentary on how the decriminalization, we don't have enough beds, and people aren't taking their meds, and they just need, in prison they're taking their meds, but when they get out, they don't have the structure, the housing structure necessary. And I thought about it. I was like, these people aren't right. And then a person I know told me to watch this Blackbird on Apple TV. And so I'm looking at it, and it's about this serial killer who's gonna get out, who's mentally ill. No, he's a serial killer, first and foremost, who has signs of mental illness. But the mental illness doesn't make this gentleman kill individuals. It's other things, but it's this Hollywood construction of this mentally ill individual, and this connection, this loose connection that people have drawn, and they've done a disservice to those who are mentally ill and the people who committed crimes. It's a service. It makes these people, vilify these people in the sake of theatrics, right? I mean, come on, man. So I'm watching this. What the fuck am I watching this garbage for? I mean, it's all lies. There's really no realistic understanding, but what it does is it pushes this point. And same with these documentaries. So the conversation. So this Blackbird shit, I'm thinking like, okay, like they got this guy who's gonna get out and kill more people if he gets let out. We need to figure out where these bodies are to be killed. Like, come on, man, for real. This is the same bullshit they push on all these CSIs and having people thinking that they're using CSI and its forensics to get you released. Yeah, I keep thinking that shit. So with that being said, I wondered in my mind how many individuals that they say that go into the structure are, because they use the structure being the save all, like they need their drugs, they need the structure, need to be, because when they're in prison, they do excellent. But what about the individuals you put in prison who commit suicide? I mean, where's those numbers at? Who's keeping track on that? Apparently nobody. Because from my standpoint, I haven't seen a documentary yet that points out, and I've seen newspaper articles, all right, but I haven't seen a documentary that looks at the effects of these drugs or people who go into these facilities who are who's suffering a mental illness that's higher than any psychotropic can give them, and they still commit suicide because they can't, because this prisons and jails aren't for people who have claustrophobia issues, who schizophrenic, who can't be in a cell with another individual. What about the individuals in the cell with them? They're not therapists. They're not psychiatrists. But you know, for the most part, you know, when they do diagnose individuals coming through, they started because of PREA. They ask you a slew of questions, and part of the questions are whether you committed suicide or whether you want to commit harm to yourself or anything like that. If you answer those questions no, then you go into a two-man cell. But if you answer them yes, you go into a single cell. A lot of times a single cell is in solitary confinement, makes it no better. So they don't go into a regular unit. They go into a unit that's built for punishment. They don't have any more. It's administrative, but usually in jail you have no more privileges in administrative than you have in being punished. So it's like the same. You come out for an hour a day, very little contact with individuals. So I'm getting at a person who has mental illness more than likely is going to say no to all those things, even though they are mentally ill, because they want to go to general pop, because they don't want to be in solitary confinement, right? Understand, like last time I said yes, they put me in solitary confinement. I'm not trying to go there. So that's a situation. But like I said, I get back to the question to ask myself, how many individuals who have committed suicide in these structured environments, because it's not befitting for an individual with mental illness. I mean, come on, man. These aren't hard questions. They know the answers to the questions. So we have to go further. We have to demystify or debunk the whole connection between violence. Because apparently if you watch this Blackbird bullshit, you believe that the serial killer who's mentally ill is going to go out and kill a bunch of people, because he's already killed 15 people, but they only could catch him with one. Yeah, okay, follow that. I got time to waste watching that bullshit. Like, please don't. I mean, get the fuck out of here. I mean, people aren't watching this, so apparently they're watching that. So maybe I need to come up with some old bullshit to push. But we're gonna debunk. We just gotta debunk this connection between mental health, mental illness, and violence, and then We just want to connect it to a individual who had mental illness, who was convicted of crime, who did a lot of time, who was murdered in prison by correctional officers who lied. And it goes on a regular basis. It's like this is something new. This is the reason that I'm doing this is because I know those individuals are the voiceless. I know these fucking bullshit ass, pussy ass correctional officers are sitting there, narrative lie. The nurses are doing the same thing, lying. You might find one individual that wants to tell the truth, but they'll be fired on Monday because that's how the system works. So as much as they want to flood these people, put these people into these cages, knowing that they don't have the right or equipped, or even if they're equipped, these individuals don't like these individuals at all, and feel as though that they can kill them. And I think that's the ultimate. If you ask me, what are you trying to get at the end of the day? Why are you doing this? Because I believe this is speculative. I believe personally the reason that it was necessary for them to shut down these institutions, mental institutions, and start housing people in prisons is because it's cheaper at the end of the day. And then it takes out a lot of accountability or a lot of things that you would have to do for a person who's supposed to still be a United States citizen, right? So it's simple. I mean, to me, looking in, and I'm saying that's why I say I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any of those things, but I can look into the situation and see that it's a lot simpler for you to eradicate an individual who has no rights than dealing with a person who does and treating them like shit who has rights, right? So once he becomes a felon at this particular juncture, you can pretty much do anything you want to him or her, and with that, extinguish them. Give them to somebody who really don't give a fuck, who wants to take them out. And that's my understanding of why that transition happened and why it was so important. So SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your
people
prison
who are
lawyer.
incarcerated. So they have enormously high burden of disease, not only higher rates of mental illness, substance use, but also infectious disease, chronic disease, that generally are much greater than we see in the rest of the population. So we have to think that the conditions of confinement inside correctional facilities are not good for people's health. They're very overcrowded. They're violent places. Unfortunately, the quality of care that people receive, even though it's constitutionally mandated, is generally inadequate. And as a result, a lot of people can often deteriorate, and especially for people with mental health needs, that deterioration can often trigger punishment. This approach where they might be likely to end up in segregation or in situations that are not going to help them regain their mental health and be in a good state. And at the same time...
Welcome back. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. Thank you for sticking the stand. This conversation means a lot because I think that it's time for someone to stop trying to get in front of the conversation and make it about them and make it about those individuals who are suffering in prison. It's serious because as much as people try to take hold of the conversation, it's bigger than anybody, and individuals need real help. They don't need people talking about it. They need to be putting money behind it and working on resolving this problem. Because I left you. Welcome back. Welcome back. Those who stepped away for a minute. I know I did. Step away for a minute. Welcome back. And I left the conversation with it being the connection between deinstitutionalization and mass incarceration. It could be assumed, because we know at the time when Reagan as governor caused himself shutting down the mental hospitals, we saw in 1971, he does it in the 60s, the late 60s, But in 71, we look at the prison population. It was 20,000 people in California prisons. It did double the jails. So now we went for jails. We knew jails doubled the net following year. So prisons, it takes a little bit longer for prisons to start seeing an increase. Because people have to go through charges, but jails are going to see it immediately, right? People getting locked up. So in 1971, we know there's 20,000 people in California prisons. In 2010, there's 162,000 people in prison, and 45% of those people are mentally ill. And then I can make the argument that all of them are in prison and mentally ill, because how do you do time in prison and not suffer mental illness? It's impossible. You have to be, in order for you not to have it, you have to already have it, because there's no way to be in prison and not suffer mental illness. It's not what I'm arguing today. I'm not trying to argue that. I'm just trying to give you why it wasn't the institutionalization that caused mass incarceration, although it looks like it from the onset. There's many people who made that argument. So we know that in 1957, Short-Dolly Act begins defunding state mental institutions. We're not going back into the history, the chronological history. We're just trying to refresh and stay a little bit with California, because I told you California is the most starkest example, and it's been documented well. The transition from mental hospitals to incarceration, and in the middle we see the deinstitutionalization. We see that governor who becomes president, and we see the decisions he's making that affects the mentally ill, which is Ronald Reagan, right? So in 1968, we see Ronald Reagan pass the Lernerman-Prentice Short Act that imposes restrictions on involuntary hospitalization of the mentally ill. We see 1972, 1973, Governor Reagan vetoes funding for community mental health facilities, so on and on with that. So there's the connection between mass incarceration and the deinstitutionalization of mental hospitals from the onset looks like it's connected. The one part is missing. So in 1967, President was Nixon. And his Tough on Crime Act is what spawned mass incarceration. And with that spawning of mass incarceration, it spawned criminalization of everything. With that criminalization of everything, now you have people who are homeless, because that's part of being mentally ill, because you have no place to go. That part becomes criminalized. So it was the fact that these institutions was closed down, they had no place to go, but they're not violent people, but everything you do now is a crime. So now they become criminals. So it wasn't so much, it was almost a combination of different things that happened. And the umbrella of that is the criminalization of everything that sparks mass incarceration. But you also had that president in 1981, which was Ronald Reagan, and in his state comes crack cocaine, which is a self-medicated drug that people who had mental illness took. So in the combination, you have this governor who was president, who was part of this increase, part of this mass incarceration, part of this deinstitutionalization, and you ask yourself, how did he receive his money? A lot of people say he's one of the best presidents they ever had, and you wonder why they say that. Now I'm giving you the facts. Why? So we have that. So now, since we went through breaking down competency, incompetent, sanity, insanity, criminality, Then we went through the history and got you past that point. Now we're up to the point where we talk about the drug industry. And the problem I watched a lot of videos that dealt with the drug industry and a lot about institutions, about how people did well when they had structure, and the structure was them religiously taking their psychotropic, and the psychotropic in turn caused them not to harm themselves or harm others. Then I watched individuals who the opposite, they were so you had individuals who were taking the psychotropic, structure helped them, and that in turn was the reasons why. So they had this whole documentary on how the decriminalization, we don't have enough beds, and people aren't taking their meds, and they just need, in prison they're taking their meds, but when they get out, they don't have the structure, the housing structure necessary. And I thought about it. I was like, these people aren't right. And then a person I know told me to watch this Blackbird on Apple TV, and so I'm looking at it, and it's about this serial killer who's gonna get out, who's mentally ill. No, he's a serial killer, first and foremost, who has signs of mental illness, but the mental illness doesn't make this gentleman kill individuals. It's other things, but it's this Hollywood construction of this mentally ill individual, and this connection, this loose connection that people have drawn, and they've done a disservice to those who are mentally ill and the people who committed crimes. It's a service. It makes these people, vilify these people in the sake of theatrics, right? I mean, come on, man. So I'm watching this. What the fuck am I watching this garbage for? I mean, it's all lies. There's really no realistic understanding, but what it does is it pushes this point. And same with these documentaries. So the conversation. So this Blackbird shit, I'm thinking like, okay, like they got this guy who's gonna get out and kill more people if he gets let out. We need to figure out where these bodies are to be killed. Like, come on, man, for real. This is the same bullshit they push on all these CSIs and having people thinking that they're using CSI and its forensics to get you released. Yeah, I keep thinking that shit. So with that being said, I wondered in my mind how many individuals that they say that go into the structure are, because they use the structure being the save all, like they need their drugs, they need the structure, because when they're in prison, they do excellent. But what about the individuals you put in prison who commit suicide? I mean, where's those numbers at? Who's keeping track on that? Apparently nobody. Because from my standpoint, I haven't seen the documentary yet that points out, and I've seen newspaper articles, all right, but I haven't seen a documentary that looks at the effects of these drugs or people who go into these facilities who are who's suffering a mental illness that's higher than any psychotropic can give them, and they still commit suicide because they can't, because this prisons and jails aren't for people who have claustrophobia issues, who schizophrenic, who can't be in a cell with another individual. What about the individuals in the cell with them? They're not therapists. They're not psychiatrists. But for the most part, when they do diagnose individuals coming through, they started because of PREA. They ask you a slew of questions, and part of the questions are whether you committed suicide or whether you want to commit harm to yourself or anything like that. If you answer those questions no, then you go into a 2-man cell. You have But if you ask them, yes, you go into a single cell. A lot of times a single cell is in solitary confinement, makes it no better. So they don't go into a regular unit. They go into a unit that's built for punishment. They don't have any more. It's administrative, but usually in jail you have no more privileges in administrative than you have in being punished. So it's like the same. You come out for an hour a day, very little contact with individuals. So I'm getting at a person who has mental illness more than likely is going to say no to all those things, even though they are mentally ill, because they want to go to general pop, because they don't want to be in solitary confinement, right? Understand, like last time I said, yes, they put me in solitary confinement. I'm not trying to go there. So that's a situation. But like I said, I get back to the question to ask myself, how many individuals who have committed suicide in these structured environments? Because it's not befitting for an individual with mental illness. Ask yourself, I mean, come on, man. These aren't hard questions. They know the answers to the questions. So we have to go further. We have to demystify the or debunk the whole connection between violence. Because apparently, if you watch this Blackbird bullshit, you believe that the serial killer who's mentally ill is going to go out and kill a bunch of people because he's already killed 15 people, but they only can catch him with one. Yeah, okay, follow that. I got time to waste watching that bullshit. Like, please don't. I mean, get the fuck out of here. I mean, people aren't watching this, so apparently they're watching that. So maybe I need to come up with some old bullshit to push. But we're gonna debunk. We just gotta debunk this connection between mental health, mental illness, and violence, and then we just want to connect it to a individual who had mental illness, who was convicted of crime, who did a lot of time, who was murdered in prison by correctional officers who lied. And it goes on a regular basis. This is something new. This is the reason that I'm doing this is because I know those individuals are the voiceless. I know these fucking bullshit ass, pussy ass correctional officers are sitting there, narrative lie. The nurses are doing the same thing, lying. You might find one individual that wants to tell the truth, but they'll be fired on Monday because that's how the system works. So as much as they want to flood these people, put these people into these cages, knowing that they don't have the right or equipped, or even if they're equipped, these individuals don't like these individuals at all, and feel as though that they can kill them. And I think that's the ultimate. If you ask me, what are you trying to get at the end of the day? Why are you doing this? Because I believe, this is speculative. I believe personally, the reason that it was necessary for them to shut down these institutions, mental institutions, and start housing people in prisons is because it's cheaper at the end of the day. And then it takes out a lot of accountability or a lot of things that you would have to do for a person who's supposed to still be a United States citizen, right? So it's simple. I mean, to me, looking in, and I'm saying, that's why I say I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any of those things, but I can look into the situation and see that it's a lot simpler for you to eradicate an individual who has no rights than dealing with a person who does and treating them like shit who has rights, right? So once he becomes a felon at this particular juncture, you can pretty much do anything you want to him or her, and with that, extinguish them. Give them to somebody who really don't give a fuck, who wants to take them out, and that's my understanding of why that transition happened and why it was so important. So SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. I'll be right back.
Associate with VIA's Substance Use and Mental Health Program. The crime bill set into motion a wave of punitive laws and prison growth that has in fact manifested in a public health crisis. It's one of the unforeseen consequences of mass incarceration that sometimes goes unnoticed. To understand the public health implications of mass incarceration, I think it's important to unpack the cycle of what happens. The first of those is to understand the health profile of people who are incarcerated. So they have enormously high burden of disease, not only higher rates of mental illness.
Welcome back to Successor, your prison lawyer. And we're going to go directly into debunking the myth and addressing realities of mental illness and violence. The first thing we really need to understand is to understand the roles that, such as poverty, neighborhood, and substance use play in violent perpetuation by people with serious mental illness as well as those without mental illness. So we understand, remember we started with the conversation being that we had drugs put into Black communities. We have mental illness in the Black community. We have people self-medicating, but we also understand that mental illness doesn't necessarily mean violence. But when you add factors such as poverty, neighborhood, substance abuse, you get violence. So with that being said, we find our connection, and we're demystifying what's going on. So what are you saying, SAFMO? I'm saying a person, just because they're mentally ill, don't mean that they're going to be violent. It means that they should not be placed in prisons. That's what that means. Person. And if a person is violent, there's certain precursors that we can see that causes the violence. Historical trauma, substance abuse, of being in a violent community. All those things that people of color suffered from, and we can see mass incarceration differently, but we can also see the how the war on drugs was multifunctional to also not only criminalize the user, but also criminalize the distributor. So it was twofold. So they're going to get the black male who's suffering. It's almost a targeted missile. It's a targeted missile. So we're going to get rid of the person who uses. We're going to get rid of the person who sells. 9 times out of 10, we're talking about people who are self-medicating. So crack is a cheap drug, and we're going to allow them to utilize it. And when they do utilize it, they're going to go to prison for a long time. And that's what we're talking about. So there was a report written for psychologists, because they knew that they were going to encounter this, and I'm utilizing that as my basis. I'm a prison lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer, nor am I a psychiatrist. So we're going to talk about a few things that they discussed that I thought was a great connection between the two, the understanding of criminality and mental health. So overall, people with serious mental illness, such as generally referred to as those with major depressive disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, are somewhat more likely than members of the general public to commit acts of violence, research shows. Now, they're gonna admit right off the bat, these people who suffer for these serious mental illness will commit violent crimes more often. But why? It's not because they're mentally ill, is the catch-all, and I guess is the spoiler. You know what I'm saying? So such research may seem to support the notion that people with mental illness pose a danger to society, but a closer look reveals the situation is more complex. There's a link between mental illness and violence, but at the same time, most people with severe mental illness are not violent. I mean, it seems like it's double talk, but it's not. It's not because because there's other factors to it. But yet still they put these people in prison, and they're putting them in prison to get them off the streets because everybody wants a safe city, right? That's Target. Boycott Target. Everybody wants a safe city, but they're not dealing with the facts that there's other social economic issues that's caused these individuals to do what they did, and that's not being played out in these movies. They're connecting the dots and making it simple for y'all. Oh, it's so simple. You know, he was mentally ill. That's why he did what he did. But that's never the case, right? Psychiatrists saying, not me. That's I'm saying it. I'm reading, doing my best thing. Remember, I went to public school, doing my best chance. This is my best show of reading. A big factor in co-concerning substance use. If you have both a mental illness and a substance use diagnosis, the combination is synergistic and dangerous. So putting crack into black communities with individuals who suffer mental illness, because all the factors are there: poverty, neighborhood is there, violent neighborhood, poverty. You have a historical trauma, right? Historical trauma. So a lot of times you're medicating for that has evolved mental illness. Your mental illness diagnosed or not diagnosed, and then you turn around and say, so it's easy for you to make criminality and mental illness synonymous, but it's not. It's very complex. And we can go further, with the ideas. So I mentioned historical trauma, and that plays a huge role into whether a person commits crime. You're talking about the history of prior violence, a history of childhood physical abuse, having a father who abused substance or was a criminal, displays antisocial behavior. All these things are factors in whether or not this individual is going to commit a violent crime. So it's not just purely mental illness. So what are the driving forces for mental illness? And I don't really want to go too far into it, but you do have a couple of contextuals, and you have dispositional situations that cause it, and it gets a little bit too clinical for a conversation. But we wanted all we wanted to do was really debunk the connection between the two and actually wrap something around it. Now, if you want to go any further, you're welcome to go further with the conversation on your own and try to figure it out. But all I want to say is that just because a person is mentally ill doesn't mean he or she will be violent. There's other factors that cause the violence. Jason, classic example. Motherfucking Jason. He had a lot of issues going on with him, and he was mentally ill and he was violent, but he had a reason why he was mentally ill and violent. It wasn't just he was mentally ill, right? And he decided to grab a knife and go kill up all these fucking campers. So, there was a lot of other stuff that went along with that. So it's not as easy as Hollywood or cookie cut as Hollywood wants to make it. We're going to come back and just discuss this last thing, use this personal example of an individual who lost his life. And this episode is going to be dedicated to Mr. Carl Taylor. Similar incident that he suffered, I suffered the same incident. So it's really personal to me, how it went down and what the cases were. So let's come back to him and let's finish it up. And hopefully you're getting something out of this. This is SF Moore, your prison lawyer. SF Moore, your prison lawyer. It's SF Moore, prison lawyer. And we're looking to answer, does incarcerating people with mental illness make you safer? And as it goes on, I think the answer is no. And like I said, I want to say the answer is no to if a person's suffering a crisis, because the crisis itself, that individual should be already this mental illness that he or she has should be dealt with outside of criminal justice, right? A police officer should not be showing up. In fact, the person who's suffering this crisis should not necessarily be in the household. And if that person is in the household for whatever reason, and I'm saying this now, and I'm going to even pull back on the household deal, because there's no reason why a person who's mentally ill should not be in the household, unless you look at it. And now I'm looking through my capitalistic lens and understanding that this is the only culture. Well, this is the culture who has established insane asylums, orphanage, jails. So when I talk to individuals, I usually think as if I'm in a capitalist society. Not to double talk or be a hypocrite, but now I have to back myself out and say, why didn't other societies, Native, Aboriginal, African, have these institutions? And that brings me back to the drugs, and drugs themselves being the cause for a lot of decompositions of people, further decomposing them, and so now you ask me a question, because initially I said, if a person was suffering a crisis, you should call the police. But then I backed out of that and said I was going to give you further explanation of that, or I wasn't holistically into that conversation. Again, I was speaking from my capitalist individual in a capitalist society and saying these are the options for you. Here's the best option of a bunch of bad options. So let's just talk a little bit before we go on to talk about Mr. Taylor and finish this up. Just want to give you a little bit of background to where this society, this capitalist society, went wrong, and it's still going wrong. And you can see the ends of this capitalist society occurring. First and foremost, anybody who studies any culture, native culture, aboriginal culture, they don't abuse drugs. They have drugs within their society, things that makes you feel good, whatever, but they don't abuse them. And that's critical, because in this society we have this conversation about substance abuse, and we ask ourselves, why does it exist in this society and it doesn't exist in any other society? But this is society, and part and parcel, because I've already said that one of the factors to serious illness, mental illness, is substance abuse, and substance abuse connected to substance abuse with mental illness usually leads to some types of violence. Again, in other societies, other cultures, other uncivilized cultures, we find not the same things that we have in this civilized culture, that they have in this civilized. That's what they say. It's a civilized culture. But these backwards people were able to figure out how not to have this. And I guess somebody who would jump in the comic box, I said SF Mobile prison lawyer, because people just love to jump in comic boxes. Don't jump in the comic boxes and say, because we're a more complex society, we have more complex problems, blah, 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 whatever the fuck, whatever. And I'm going to tell you this, that's an outright lie. It's not the complexity of the society, it's the fact that the society is rooted in capitalization that fakes and feigns the fact that it's a social society, that social society has to be institutionalized, is a problem within itself. We're going to step it one step further. The reason that we said mass incarceration could not be that deinstitutionalization could not be a contributing factor to mass incarceration, we do realize when you look at all those fucking pictures of those insane asylums, there were white fucking people. It wasn't black, they were white. So even if they de-institutionalize mental health facilities, it was middle-class white people that was in them. People they didn't like, people they didn't want. They were in them. They weren't blacks. Mass incarceration was black folks. So how did that occur? And I explained it to you. That's why I broke it down to you. I had to explain it to you. And I had to draw this history. I know people don't like, they want TikTok dance, do all this quick, fast shit. There's no quick, fast shit to this shit because it took years, centuries, decades for them to get to where they get to. And they still running that shit right the fuck now because people are not paying attention to what's going on. So I just told you was not the deinstitutionalization. People will tell you it's doing deinstitutionalization, mental health that contribute to the rise in crime, rise in prison population. It was the criminalization. It was the criminalization. It was the tough on crime, the same shit they say every single day that caused the increase. And then you add drugs. It was two prongs to get the mentally ill and get the people who sold them. Here we go. That's mass incarceration. So back to our African culture, and the reason I brought up the drugs again, even though I said we were gonna go to Mr. Taylor and finish off with Mr. Taylor. The reason I brought up the drugs is because with the drugs, we're gonna find that in Native culture, we find them utilizing certain drugs. In African culture, and it's ceremonious, right? And the ceremony is what we want to talk about right now, right? We're going to talk about the removal of the ceremony from these people, the replacement of drugs in place of ceremony. So now you have an abuse, because remember, we utilize drugs in ceremony, and drugs were, and ceremony was an outlet for individuals. And the reason, I'm trying to explain to you the reason why a person who comes to you and says, oh, the reason why we have these complex problems because we're a complex society. No, because y'all don't get no fuck. The reason you have these problems. The reason why we didn't have these problems in our African society is because we were a spiritual people. We believed in spirits. We believed in people being deities. Like my great grandmother, a deity. So we would never be able to call her a B word ever, or any lineage from her. Right? She created you. Why would she be? How could she be? Right? So with that, the ceremony in itself was part of our culture. And the ceremony and those individuals who were part of the ceremony were utilized. We had faith, strong faith. And there was no abuse. None. So with ceremony, when I'm getting that, with ceremony and the understanding of spirits, in turn, there was no need for insane asylums or anything like that. There was no need for drug abuse or anything like that. So that removed all what they have now out of our culture. But since we don't understand our culture and we're so far removed from it, our culture now and our religion now is economics and classism. We then turn to drug abuse, and we do have mental illness, because there's no spiritual, ceremonious understanding of who we are and what the spirit is. So now we have the evil spirits they talk about in the Bible. Let's just finish up with this this article about it at Atlantic. It talks about Mr. Taylor. Unfortunate for this individual. So Mr. Taylor is in New York prison system. And about 20 some years ago, 30 some years ago now, he had a rape pinned on him. And when I say pinned on him, he suffers from mental illness. And when the police interrogated him about the rape, he said that they had consensual sex. Now, I don't know if the person was white. I don't know what the deal was, because the person's not named in the complaint. But we know that he had a sentence of 27 and a half years, and he's a sex offender for rape. Said he didn't commit. Remember, went over our definition: competent to stand trial and not insane. Get into prison, we get to diagnose him now. He's insane. Well, he has a disorders, schizophrenia, and stuff like that. Now, I'm not sure if he had any documentation prior to that. But we know now he's diagnosed with it. So we're going to fast forward the story. We're going to hit the morning of April 13th, 2015. We're in a Sullivan Correctional Facility. That's in New York. It's maximum. And he's in a mental ward in a maximum security. What happens is there's two different stories to what happened. There's two different takes to what's happened. And in the middle, I guess, is the truth. Or it's Ron B in the middle. What's up, Ron B in the middle? Sasaf Mo, prison lawyer. There's some states, there's a conversation that he was upset about something. And a guard, this Tucker, a military dude, was an asshole to start with. We know about them. And they function well within these institutions. And it goes back to my conversation about them utilizing the criminal justice system to extinguish people with mental health because they can legally do it, right? I mean, the difference is like, if you do start to cut that slice of bread and you get a person who goes in, say if the individual is insane. The easiest example is a person who is incompetent, right? Where a judge might send you off for a psychiatric evaluation, and a person is still acting like he or she is Looney Tunes, right? It might be an act, right? So they feel like, oh, if I do it, I'm gonna. So, you know, at a particular time, they can say you're incompetent, and they say you're competent, and then start the trial off, right? But insanity is just a mitigating factor. It's a defense. It's mitigating. It says at the time you can get off on a defense, right? You can. It's going to mitigate circumstances, make the jury allow the jury to show compassion towards your situation. You snap the fuck out. You know, found out your wife was cheating on you. Snap the fuck out. You know what I'm saying? It's defense. You know, like, so mental illness at the time that you had an episode of crisis, you're in crisis at the time, you committed a crime, it looked different than if it was intentional or unintentional. It was a psychotic episode. So with that being said, now we're pressing on in a situation with the gentleman, Mr. Taylor, first name Carl, black African-American gentleman. He's upset that day, upset about something that was supposed to be going on, or something he was supposed to, I think it was just, he was upset about something. And he was told to go back into his cell. And this guard, and I haven't seen it in any of these state prisons, but he was able to have they used to call them billy clubs. He was able to have one. And and it's several incidents that Mr. Taylor had with this guard, and it was already known that this guard had it in for him. He was cognitive enough to understand that this guard did not like him and was doing things to him, and he actually wrote a grievance against the guard. But you got to understand, in a correctional facility, this is a perfect place to take individuals who you don't like, put them there, and you can turn a blind eye. There's not going to be, they don't care if this, you can tell them COs are doing whatever. In our Angela Jackson case, we got a CO who's abusing individuals, but they really don't care, right? So you can so specifically a person who has a diagnosed mental illness is the best place to put them, right? Because guard can pretty much do anything he wants to do to you because you're mentally insane or have mental illness or whatever you want to say. So he's having a bad day. So let's leave it at that. So he's told to go back into a cell, and as he goes back into the cell, this is where the conversation or the facts split. Some say that Mr. Taylor hit Mr. Tucker being a CO. Others say that it was the opposite way. What happened? Nobody truly knows. Apparently there's no cameras, or the footage hasn't been released. And understand that they've had problems. Tucker has talked about Mr. Taylor not taking a shower. CO Tucker has talked about his cell not being cleaned. All these are situations where a person who suffers mental illness might not have the capacity to do those things. And remember, CO Tucker's in a mental illness ward or section or area. So why he's, and it seems more, as I read it, more harassment than anything to this gentleman. So something happened as Mr. Taylor was being escorted back to his cell by CO Tucker. CO Tucker gets the bad end of the stick, I would say, because Mr. Taylor was able to commandeer his billy club and use it against him. Of course, he calls his little CO friends. That's why they're so cocky in there, because they know they can call their little friends, and they just like the Klan, come and beat up on you. See, one of them by themselves ain't shit, but they get like 10 to 8 of their buddies, and they're trying to beat the shit out of you, right? Because they can basically use deadly force because they can against a man who's you basically pushing his buttons. He's mentally ill, but you might be having a bad day because your wife says some shit to you, or you feel as though you're not getting paid enough, or you feel as though you don't want to be at work and you want to fuck with somebody, but you said it to the wrong person. He whipped his ass, but he hit his button, called his buddies, and they took him like they took me, and they sell people in the cell. A lot of times in these situations when they're having individuals where they're whipping on somebody, especially in SEG, they come in with these screens, and they pull them across you because you only have a slit to look out of. You can only hear, and they'll put it across your door so you can't be a witness to what's going on. It's for your protection, right? They want to do what they need to do to you, so they'll put those little covers over your windows so you can't see shit. So it ends up happening. Mr. Taylor's pronounced deceased at the hospital. They claimed that he had a cardiac arrest. We hear that many a times from hypertension, right? Black men with hypertension. Hypertension. fucking, stress. Motherfucking white motherfucker, stress. Motherfucking white motherfucker telling you what to do 24/7 in your face, bitch ass motherfucking CO. So they said it was from hypertension. He had a cardiac arrest. Sister, she comes into the picture. They fall off for some reason, but when this happens, she comes in the picture, and it's an autopsy performed, and he has these particular images in his eye that show that he was strangled. Inmates, the individuals, the prisoners there have a different story than the guards. And of course, they're gonna lie, they stick together, they're a gang, they're the Klan, the modern day version of a Klan. Fits all the definitions of a gang. So that's the story, Mr. Taylor. And it's so sad it happens so many times in these institutions. And it goes unnoticed. They're too busy making bullshit ass movies about blackbirds and prisons and mental. They're not making. When's the last time you seen a movie about COs killing a prisoner, or a news story about it? COs killing the prisoners. When's the last time you seen a news story about it? And I'm telling you, I was in prison. I seen this shit happen, and it was a blip in the news. It was a tag in the news. Inmate dies in prison. That's all it said. It was so in their minds, it didn't really matter, so they didn't even bother to make it a news story. Happens on a regular basis, and it makes suicides happens on a regular basis. Doesn't even make news, and it's sad. It's really the reason we started IGSTS, to give these individuals the voices of the voiceless. We care. Nobody cared. We care. So the story with Mr. Taylor is the story that I want to end with. I also want to make people aware of the 988 number for people in crisis. I'm not too familiar. I should be a lot more familiar with it if I'm going to talk about it. But I never really. Until actually looking at the story, I saw it come through a news feed, but I never really checked it out. I didn't think of checking out. Also CRUs, for the most part, they just seem like they're underfunded, and nobody really wants to deal with it. I think they get into police to beat up people, to incarcerate people. They don't want to help people. I don't think that they're the same things. So it's rare do you find an individual who wants to be a police officer, help people, and actually be a police officer to help people. It's usually diametrically opposite. So I can understand those individuals not really wanting to be part of a CRU, mental health. And I don't like I said, for as far as people of color is concerned in mental health, in the criminal justice system, I think for us, it's not that they are the same, but they are the same in their outcomes, right? So if you're mentally ill, you have criminal tendencies. They're gonna all come together and get you situated to prison. All the factors that exist in our community, but the biggest thing is the fact that the drug use and the drugs being placed in the community has caused us. It not only the increase in prisons, but also the breakdown of the community. Purposeful. We started a question not trying to get off into whether or not the mental illness is purposeful, or it's not even mental illness, because it's not something people you can't create it. You can create the conditions for it. And what I mean is that you can put a person in the cell and make them fucking insane. How do you not go in that? Name a person that can go into a fucking cell and not come out insane. It's impossible. So my contentions has always been, by placing a person inside a prison, you're making them making him or her mentally ill.
Good job, baby.
You're in the motherfucking grill pit.